Behind the grand facades of southern mansions lay horrors no diary dared to record, crimes that were silenced, because they were committed by the very people who wrote the history books. Candlelight flickers across cracked walls, shadows stretching long across polished floors. Chains rattle softly in the distance. The wind whispers through empty corridors, carrying the faintest echo of footsteps that never belonged to freedom. This isn't the story you were taught in school. This is the one they buried, the hidden crimes and abuses that happened behind plantation doors. If walls could talk, what would they whisper about the people trapped inside? The American South, late 18th to mid-19th century, stretched out like an empire built on stolen lives. Opulent mansions stood proudly against the horizon, yet beneath their shining chandeliers lay suffering and fear. White families moved through rooms filled with silk and candlelight, their wealth measured in the bones, sweat, and silence of those they claimed as property. On the surface, there was civility, grace, and the image of southern gentility. Beneath it, a darkness churned, a hidden world where obedience was enforced not only with whips, but with fear, humiliation, and the quiet domination of entire families. What did it take to maintain this illusion of grace, and what horrors were committed to keep it alive? Slavery was never just an economic system. It was a structure designed to control, break, and erase identity. Enslaved men and women were stripped of legal personhood. Their bodies, labor, and very existence belonged to someone else. Power was enforced through constant surveillance, public punishment, and the twisting of religion and law to justify cruelty. Every rule, every hierarchy, reinforced a system where obedience became instinct and silence became survival. The night brought no relief. Whispers traveled between quarters. Shadows carried secrets the daylight dared not acknowledge. And in that silence, power became the most dangerous form of hunger. Inside the plantation home, the hierarchy of oppression deepened. Cooks, maids, nannies, and attendants lived a life closer to the masters. But proximity was danger. The household enslaved were not only workers. They were instruments of control, always under the watchful eye of those who could punish, humiliate, or exploit at any moment. Domestic abuse became a private tool of power. Acts of physical or emotional violence were framed as discipline, and humiliation was paraded as instruction. The master's journals hint at these acts in euphemisms like correction or training, but the truth was far more brutal. These weren't moments of teaching, they were calculated violations, designed to ensure every enslaved person knew their place and the fragility of their survival. Every locked door concealed a story. Every whispered command carried the echo of pain. The emotional toll of this hidden world was immense. Every act of dominance left scars invisible to the eye but carved into the soul. The enslaved learned to fragment themselves, to hide thought, fear, and sorrow. Silence became instinct. Children born under this oppression carried the bloodline of the oppressor, a cruel living reminder of violation, domination, and inheritance of trauma. Entire families were haunted by what could not be spoken. To live was to survive within a nightmare. Historical accounts, letters, and narratives hint at the fear, humiliation, and loss of dignity that shaped generations. Imagine existing in a world where your tears, your grief, your very pain could cost you your life, and yet the world above pretended nothing was wrong. Even after emancipation, the shadows followed. Freed people carried invisible wounds through streets that promised freedom but delivered silence. Many tried to speak. Many were ignored. The patterns of abuse, humiliation, and terror were recorded in fragments, coded in whispers, and hidden within diaries and letters that few dared to read. The facade of Southern civility remained unchallenged in history books, textbooks, and popular memory. Yet historians slowly began to uncover the truth. The cruelty was systemic, private, and deliberate. For every story told, hundreds remained buried. And even now, we are only beginning to listen. After emancipation, the quiet walls of plantations began to speak, slowly, through letters, memoirs, and oral histories. Freed men and women told fragments of the horrors they had endured, often in cautious tones, fearing disbelief or reprisal. Their words carried the weight of decades of silent suffering, whispers that revealed the cruel mechanics of control inside homes, behind locked doors, and within rooms the world refused to acknowledge. Many stories were edited or suppressed by publishers seeking to maintain a polished image of the South, and some accounts were dismissed as exaggeration, the tales of traumatized minds. Yet, within the cracks of those narratives, historians uncovered patterns. The abuse was not occasional, not accidental. It was systematic, deliberate, and protected by law and tradition. Every diary, every personal letter, every narrative that survived the erasure was a thread pulling back the curtain on centuries of hidden power crimes. Modern historians, archaeologists, and social researchers now piece together this haunting legacy, uncovering the contradictions between the polished public lives of enslavers and the dark, filthy realities of their private domains. Documents reveal euphemisms like correction, discipline, or house management. But within those words lie acts of psychological terror, sexual domination, and humiliation. The enslaved had no recourse, no law, no advocate, no sanctuary. Even the children born of these abuses became property, their lives an enduring reminder of domination, a cruel testament to the complete ownership of bodies, bloodlines, and futures. Cultural memory attempted to erase the truth. For generations, textbooks sanitized history, focusing on the economy, the cotton fields, and the logistics of labor, while avoiding the moral abyss that lay within the master's house. Southern literature and early cinema romanticized the plantation, portraying white masters as benevolent figures and enslaved people as content laborers. Museums omitted the darkest chapters. Public discourse preferred myth to memory. Yet, as modern Black historians and filmmakers confront this sanitized history, the voices of the silenced begin to rise, insisting on acknowledgement. Each recovered narrative, each uncovered diary, each oral testimony is a rebellion against the erasure, a reclaiming of humanity that the system sought to destroy. The psychological underpinnings of this power are disturbing. Absolute control allowed the moral decay of entire households. Men and women who claimed Christian virtue used religion to rationalize domination, convincing themselves that property and human bodies were theirs by divine right. Power became obsession. Obsession became ritual. Sexual exploitation, psychological torment, and the constant threat of violence became normalized, turning cruelty into a culture and silence into survival. Enslavers transformed intimacy into domination, compassion into punishment, and family into a weapon of fear. The enslaved learned to navigate this world through careful observation, subterfuge, and coded communication, carrying trauma invisibly while striving to preserve whatever dignity remained. The legacy continues to echo. Descendants of the enslaved carry inherited trauma, a cultural and emotional weight passed through generations. Modern DNA studies reveal the genetic impact of these abuses, while historical research connects family lineages to both perpetrators and victims, confirming patterns of systemic sexual exploitation that were deliberately hidden. Communities struggle with the inherited silence, grappling with identity, shame, and resilience. These truths challenge not only history but the very understanding of social, racial, and cultural dynamics in America. Ultimately, the story is one of human resilience amid the darkest expressions of power. These were not merely acts of cruelty. They were acts of control that shaped families, society, and collective memory. To acknowledge them is to confront the moral decay of the past and the lingering echoes that touch the present. Every brick of every mansion, every board in every hallway, every shadow in every abandoned room remembers the suffering, the terror, and the courage of those who endured. The past is not gone. It whispers, it demands, it insists on remembrance. And if we are willing to listen, it can teach us about humanity, depravity, and the resilience that refuses to die. The plantations may now stand silent, the fields empty, the chains rusted, but history cannot be silenced forever. The hidden crimes, the abuses, and the suffering remain imprinted in the landscape, the archives, and the memory of a people who survived. To face them is not only to honor the victims but to confront the enduring truths of power, morality, and human dignity. The dark side of human authority is as relevant today as it was centuries ago. A reminder that unchecked power corrupts absolutely, and that the cost of silence can span generations. These stories are not merely historical. They are living echoes, challenging the comfortable narratives of a nation built on both wealth and secrecy. They demand that we see the plantations not as symbols of elegance, but as sites of moral collapse, exploitation, and resilience. Every hidden room, every secret corridor, every silenced voice teaches us about the depths of human depravity, the costs of ownership, and the power of remembrance. The past still breathes, insisting that its lessons be heard. The shadows of those who lived and suffered linger, urging us to confront truths that were never meant to be spoken. The final reflection takes us into the quiet aftermath, where the shadows of history settle but never disappear. Walking through the abandoned halls, the silent floors seem to hold the weight of countless stories, each echoing a life stolen, a dignity erased, a soul bent beneath the yoke of ownership. These rooms, once filled with whispered threats, cold commands, and unspeakable acts, are now empty. Yet the memory of what happened within them resonates through time. The silence is heavy, not peaceful. It is the echo of trauma, the residue of cruelty that survives even after liberation. Every creak of a floorboard, every crack in the plaster, every peeling shutter bears witness to the suffering that polite history refused to acknowledge. To understand these crimes is to confront the moral failure of a society that turned human beings into property. It is to see how law, culture, and religion colluded to make the unspeakable routine, to render empathy optional, and to create a system where ownership over life extended into ownership over body, mind, and soul. The enslaved learned survival through submission, clever defiance, and sometimes the smallest acts of humanity that could be protected from the master's gaze. They memorized patterns, hidden shadows, and carried secret knowledge, a resilience that endured even when hope was scarce and despair was constant. Yet, the consequences of this hidden world stretch beyond the plantation gates. Generations have inherited trauma, unspoken pain, and fragmented histories. Families bear the weight of violence, identity, and the silent inheritance of oppression. Cultural memory, music, folklore, and storytelling preserve echoes of lives endured under fear and domination. DNA carries traces of the past. Bloodlines reveal the intimate violations once concealed behind walls and words. The legacies of sexual abuse, psychological manipulation, and domination are not confined to history books. They live in the body, in family histories, and in the collective memory of Black communities. Modern scholarship and artistic expression continue to uncover and amplify these hidden truths. Museums, documentaries, literature, and oral history projects work to restore names, faces, and voices that slavery attempted to erase. Each revelation challenges sanitized narratives, forcing society to grapple with the full scope of exploitation, oppression, and moral failure. The process is painful, uncomfortable, yet necessary, an act of justice and remembrance. By confronting the horrors of hidden abuses, we honor the resilience of those who endured and ensure that the lessons of the past are not forgotten. The final meditation on this history returns to the human dimension. Enslaved men and women were never mere statistics. They were people with emotions, desires, fears, and unrecorded acts of resistance. Their suffering was real, immediate, and deliberately concealed. They endured the filthy underbelly of absolute power, coerced labor, sexual exploitation, family separations, and humiliation designed to maintain dominance. But they also survived, resisted, and found ways to preserve dignity in even the smallest of acts, in whispered songs, in coded messages, in hidden knowledge, in the love they carried for their children. Their courage remains, etched invisibly into the landscape and the culture they helped shape. As the camera pans over empty fields, broken fences, and decaying plantation homes, the narration turns soft but persistent. History may have tried to hide the truth, but it cannot erase it. The dark side of power remains visible in its consequences, in inequality, cultural memory, and the moral reckoning that society continues to face. The silence of the past is no longer acceptable. We are called to listen, to bear witness, and to confront the brutal realities that polite society once obscured. The lessons are not only about cruelty but about vigilance, justice, and the enduring human spirit. Closing visuals linger on forgotten corners, overgrown gardens, and cracked windows, a metaphor for lives neglected but not erased. The narrator concludes, "These were not stories of romance or adventure. They were stories of domination, obsession, and human endurance. They remind us that the cost of power without conscience is always paid in suffering, and that the echoes of what was hidden demand acknowledgement, even centuries later." The final line, whispered over a slow, haunting score. The crimes behind these doors were meant to vanish with time. But memory survives. History listens. And so must we.